Everyone keeps talking about the extreme seller's market that we are in, and we have been since about 2020. Well, 2022 is no different. Our inventory actually started off 5% lower than it did in 2021. Getting your offer accepted right now is challenging to say the least, whether you're up against multiple offers, cash offers, people that have waived every inspection known to man, or sellers that need to stay in the house longer past the close date. And the other one is that you have a house to sell before you can buy. These are just a few of the things that buyers are up against when they are buying a home in today's market. How do you navigate all of these things and make your offer stand out? That's what we are going to talk about right now. Now, I want to address something right off the bat because it's something that people used back in 2020 that was really kind of working well for buyers that were kind of pleading their case to the sellers. And that's that Dear Homeowner letter. But I can tell you that that has now been brought in front of a few different court cases, and in some states they are now absolutely illegal to do. So I do not advise it. It runs into some fair housing issues. It is not advisable. I get the reason behind why people wanted to do it. They really wanted to kind of show how much they loved the seller's house and please, please, please pick me. But it really kind of backfired on some people. And so if you're working with an agent that is advising that, or if you're asking them and they say, sure, go ahead, kind of a red flag. Make sure you know what you can and cannot say. There's a lot of gray, and it's not something that I would advise. But I wanted to bring that up because that was a big, big tool that people were using. And I know a lot of buyers out there that weren't in the market before have heard that, and they start talking about like, oh, I've got my letter ready. And I always go, oh, hold on to that. We really can't use it now. So just something to be aware of. Okay, so then if you can't use that, how do you make your offer stand out? Now, I know a lot of people are going to go, God, I can't do it. I can't do it. Because the best way to make your offer stand out is cash. I hate to say it. I know people are going to be mad at me for saying that, but it's the reality. If you can pay cash, it does make your offer stand out. Why does it stand out so much above others? Because it takes every single contingency out of the contract once you're past the inspection. You have no appraisal, you have no loan contingency, you have nothing else in the contract other than you've got the inspection still in the contract and your ability as a buyer to look at the HOA documents if you're in an HOA and all the title commitment paperwork. After that, there are no other contingencies in the contract. So cash offers are the cleanest and the easiest route for a seller to go. Now, if you can't pay cash, there are ways to make your financed offer feel and look like cash. One of the biggest ways is waiving the appraisal. So I have a long conversation with my buyers when it comes to potentially needing to waive the appraisal. I want them to understand, what does that look like? So when we're talking about waiving the appraisal, I will also talk to the lender and see if maybe they can rush that appraisal for the buyer so that at least during the inspection period, they can get that done and know what it looks like so that they can feel confident moving forward with the contract. If for some reason that appraisal comes back and it is way off, I still have a way to get people out of the contract and save their earnest money in that inspection period. That is a great tip. If you're not comfortable completely waiving the appraisal, there is one other option, and that's called an appraisal shortfall. What is an appraisal shortfall? It is a number that you decide you are willing to pay over the appraised value if it does not come back at the contract price. The biggest reason to use this is because you have a limited amount of money that you have the ability to pay over the appraised value. So that's exactly what this appraisal shortfall does. It allows you to say, I can pay $20,000 over the appraised value. If I need to bridge that gap more than $20,000, I don't have it and I won't be able to qualify for the loan. So an appraisal shortfall is a great tool to utilize if you feel like you need to waive that appraisal, but completely waiving it, you just can't swing it. I will say that in our market currently, the appraisal waiver is going to be looked at more heavily than the appraisal shortfall. However, this is where your agent comes into play. If your agent, the buyer's agent, calls the listing agent and says, hey, how many offers do you have? Let's talk about this. I really want to understand what do the sellers need, which is our job as the buyer's agent. And we find out that maybe they don't have as many contracts as they thought they were going to get. Maybe they're not in the price point that they thought they were going to be in, and your clients really want it. This is a great time to use that appraisal shortfall to make sure you secure that home for them without having to completely waive that appraisal. So one of the next things you can do to make your offer extremely appealing is offer to buy the house as is. Now, The Arizona contract is already written as an as-is contract. However, we have standard in the contract a 10-day inspection period. What people are doing right now is that although it's written as an as-is contract, they're writing an additional language that says something to the effect of buyer to buy the house as is and make no repair requests. This is very, very appealing to the seller because they think they're not going to utilize the inspection period as a new time to renegotiate the contract, which is what sometimes happens. Now, the buyer is still completely able to do any and all inspections that they want. And if a list comes back from the inspector that is just too big for the buyer to take on, they have the ability to cancel and still get their earnest money back. They just can't ask for anything to be done once the inspection is complete. Now, I know that some agents are telling their clients otherwise from what I just said. What do I mean by that? They're saying to their clients, just write in that it's going to be as is, and when we get the inspection back, we'll be locked into the contract. The sellers won't want to start over again, so we'll still ask for a few things to be done. I don't advise this either. I just had someone do this, a buyer's agent do this on one of my listings, and guess what the seller said? No. We had 4 backup contracts. I was called every single day about this house. There was no way the seller was going to do anything different than what the buyer and the seller had already agreed upon when they accepted the contract. It did backfire on the agent, and guess who ended up paying? The agent paid to make the buyer happy. Again, I just caution people when they're getting advice like this, don't worry, we'll get it under contract. I know we said that, but we'll still ask for things. Be careful, it could backfire in this market. It just is crazy. So make sure you're getting the best information possible. So another way to make your offer look really strong is to shorten the inspection period. So standard in our contract, we have a 10-day inspection period. I have seen people shorten it to 7 days. I have seen people shorten it to 5 days. I have even seen people that really know what they're going to do with the house. Maybe it needs a complete remodel. They don't even care what the inspection comes back like. I have even seen buyers that know exactly what they're going to do with the house completely waive the inspection. So they have 0 days for the inspection. It is not something that I would recommend unless you are that buyer that absolutely understands what the house is, what it's going to take to remodel it, and it's something that you really, really want. When shortening the inspection period, most of the buyers will ask, well, gosh, can the inspection really get done in that short amount of time? And the answer is yes. What I usually do is I will call my inspector and make sure that it can actually happen before we commit to anything, just so that we know. So one of the biggest things that's happening right now are sellers need to stay in their home after they close. So maybe they need to stay 2 months. Maybe they only need a month. Maybe they need 6 months. But it's something that you need to understand before you get your clients falling in love with a house. Now, I'm just going to bring this up right now because there is a company in Phoenix that is doing a ton of advertising saying that they will get their sellers to be able to stay in their house for 6 months. And I just have to tell you, they are not the only ones that can do that. If you are working with a good agent, they can negotiate that for you just as easily. This is not something special that only they can do. Now, if you have more questions about that specifically, go ahead and give me a call. I'm going to put my number here on the screen, so go ahead, call me. Yeah, go ahead, call me right now. I'll wait. Go ahead. Okay, guys, those were really, really good questions. Thanks for calling. Now, when a buyer's agent knows that a home is in a great location, great condition, all of the things are aligned, they know they're going to get multiple offers. So what do they do for their clients? They're going to call the listing agent and say, what does your seller need? And that is super, super important to do so that you can start talking with your buyer about all the things that the seller is wanting. It's kind of the seller's wish list. So if the seller needs post-possession, you can talk about that. How long does it need to be? What kind of rent are they looking for? Or are they looking to stay for free? I know that sounds crazy, but it's happening all the time right now. And allowing a seller to stay for free is just another perk for them to look at your contract more favorably. Now, so do you have to do that? No, you do not. And I have seen buyers and sellers agree on a few $1,000s for the month or 2 months that they are going to be allowed to stay after the home closes. But to make your offer a really strong offer, my suggestion always to my buyers is, if you can swing it, I would let them stay for free. And again, every situation is different, so it really needs to be looked at and talked through thoroughly. Okay, so those are some of the big terms to add to the contract. So what about the price? Well, Again, depending on the location, condition of the homes, have all the major systems been replaced, the roof, all of those things, how much over the list price are you going to be paying? And again, this comes down to communication between the buying agent and the selling agent. How many contracts do you have? Where are you on your price? Will you take an escalation clause? All of these things will really help determine how much over the list price that you as the buyer are willing to go. Now, the way that I usually handle it is that we really look at the comparables and we talk about it. Then I can really give you my advice and tell you this is where I see the price going, but ultimately it is the buyer's decision of how much over the list price they're willing to go. Now, I mentioned escalation clause just a second ago. Let's talk about that one. It is a great tool to use so that you can determine, I am willing to pay X, but if a contract comes in higher than mine, I am willing to go Y amount over that up to Z amount. So it really kind of gives you a price range that you're able to play within. And oftentimes you're going to pay that Z amount, but maybe you don't. And maybe you just pay $2,000 above X. But it allows you to stay in the game. Again, a caution to this. There are some agents out there that are saying my seller does not want to see any escalation clauses. Please send me your highest and best offer. So that escalation clause kind of gets thrown out the window in those cases. However, I do think that it can be a great tool to use to keep you in the game. So back to a term, because I've only seen this a couple times, but I did want to bring it up. It was that the buyers were going to pay the seller's closing costs. Again, I've only seen this on a couple contracts, but again, it's another term that you can utilize. Here is what has to happen. The buyer can pay the seller's closing costs. However, you need to make sure that if the buyer is offering the seller $10,000 towards their closing costs, the seller immediately thinks, well, that's $10,000 greater to my net profit. The problem is that oftentimes, unless your price point is very high, your closing costs are not going to be $10,000. So you really need to call the title company, find out what are those closing cost amounts going to be for the seller. Because if they're going to offer $10,000, you could leave money on the table if the closing costs are not $10,000, because the buyer cannot cut a check to the seller for the additional amount, and the title company can't just add that in at the bottom line, on the bottom line of the settlement statement, and say, okay, here, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's the additional money that they agreed to pay for closing costs that didn't go towards closing costs. So again, just something to be aware of, something to make sure that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, if that's something that is in a contract that you're looking at. Okay, so now I want to talk about something that is not in every contract, but it does come up in some contracts, and I've started seeing it more and more recently. And I actually got a call from a viewer we started talking about the 1031 exchange. And she had some questions about it, and so we went through it, and she said, you should add that in one of your videos. So here you go. Thank you for your suggestion. So with the 1031 exchange, let's say the buyer is doing that 1031 exchange. All they're doing is they're taking the money from the sale of another property, putting it into an intermediary company that holds that money. They have 45 days to designate a home that they would like to purchase, and then they have 180 days to close on that same property, and use that money from the intermediary company to close on that property. So the big questions that I get about this are, what is there a cost to the seller? If the buyer is doing the 1031 exchange, is there a cost to the seller? And the answer is no. The buyer incurs all the cost with that third-party intermediary company. That company works in conjunction with the title company. So other than paperwork, there's really not much else that anybody needs to do. The big thing to know that is, if you are doing a 1031 exchange, you have to take the same amount of money and invest in the same amount of money, or you are going to be paying that gain, which you're trying to defer until later. So just another thing to know, again, if you have questions about that, let me know, and I can pass you on to somebody that can answer much more detailed questions than maybe I can. Our market is moving very, very fast. And to make a really compelling offer, you really should be utilizing one or all of these tools and techniques that I just talked about. So if I can answer any other questions for you, please feel free. Reach out, call me, email me, text me, post a comment down below. If you think this video could help anybody you know, please feel free to pass it along. I'd love to make sure that other people get this valuable information. And as always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.